Good morning. Christine Wilkie-Bohlmann and I, Philip Bohlmann, would like to welcome you this morning to a performance of one of the greatest works of music in the 20th century. Die Weise von Liebe und Tod des Kornets Christoph Rehlke, the chronicle of the love and death of the flag bearer Christoph Rehlke, composed in the concentration camp at Theresienstadt in 1944 by Viktor Ullmann, to a prose poem by Rainer Maria Rilke. The great Czech composer Viktor Ullmann began sketches on the melodrama. He actually called it a monodram, composed for a single speaking voice and piano. He began it in the summer of 1944. He brought the sketches to a close in early autumn on September 27th, his sister Ellie's birthday, and he dedicates the work to her. This was only days before his deportation to the concentration camp at Auschwitz, where he was killed upon arrival, probably on October 16, 1944. The sketches for the chronicle of the love and death of the flag bearer Christoph Rehlke remained in the concentration camp in the care of those left behind, and eventually they survived and came into possession of a Terezin survivor, H.G. Adler, a musicologist and writer whose novel Eine Reise, The Journey, remains one of the greatest literary testaments to the devastation in the camps. Christine, would you like to say a few words about the music itself?
I'd first like to mention that this is a so-called short score, meaning that it's not a transcription for piano. This is a composition which he intended to orchestrate, and he, in fact, did partially orchestrate several movements. So it's not pianistic in many ways, and you'll hear me jumping around and using tremolos as a way, or trills as a way of making the song, the sound last longer than you can with a held note on the piano. There are also indications in the score where you have to crescendo on a held note, impossible on the piano, or where you have a low note, fortissimo, fast tempo, or fortissimo instructed to go to pianissimo in 4 beats. Impossible. So we know there have to be some arrangements done. The other thing about the score is that it's for speaker and piano, and so it's not only not pitched, but it has no rhythm indicated. We just have words written on top of the piano score, and in the beginning movements, they're fairly carefully placed. But at the end, when he knew his deportation to Auschwitz was imminent, he just put whole blocks of text on the music. And so we have to kind of try to do our best to figure out how to make it meaningful, because we can't do 4 lines of text in 5 measures of prestissimo tempo. So it just is impossible. So that's part of the challenge of it. Other than that, you know, I've had people say that it's very eclectic, and I strongly disagree with it. There are a lot of, some of the chords are unusual, but there are definitely patterns. And in some ways, there's the use of motifs, not like Beethoven, that kind of motif, and not like the Wagner leitmotif, but we do have some things that occur exactly even the same pitch and rhythm. And one of them, for example, is a so-called reiten, or riding, like riding a horse. Giddy up, giddy up, giddy up. And in the first movement, it's pretty quick, of course, when he's energetic about going off to war, but at the end, when he's after going home, disillusioned, it's marked at half the tempo. The other thing against that is, so that's G, and later on we'll get it in this version, in another movement, that the same minor second. Then the other thing is he has this. So here comes the bride, a lot of perfect force in the piece, but against that F, we get that tritone, which is the most dissonant interval. So we get, so you'll hear that theme. Another thing, he'll take an unusual chord, but does the chord progression over and over in different contexts. For example, this is one. So this is one version with the right motif in the left hand. Later on, done double tempo, then double it again, then double it again. Etc. Then in the last movement of the first part, we have that same chord with a or in another version where we're going and transpose. And in another movement, he takes that chord progression, moves it up chromatically. It's the same chord, and he goes. So here's an example of that. So it's the same chord, it's dissonant major third tritone. So that's in a minor seventh. So that's major seventh. So that it's dissonant, but he repeats it enough that it becomes a sound that we recognize. And back to Phil.
The Chronicle of Christoph Rilke both is and is not completed, which is to say it survives its sketches and fragments for the short score in the archive of the Paul Sacher Foundation in Basel, Switzerland. It is these Basel sketches that we've studied in preparation for the performance you will hear this morning at the University of Chicago Humanities Day. The boundaries within this magnificent musical work form a rich fabric in Ullmann's Chronicle, with the real and the imaginary intersecting in a complex counterpoint of musical composition, whose conclusion is sought anew through each performance. We probably will perform it in a different way every time we work through it, because there are so many parts that need to be combined in new, that challenge us to rethink how they relate to each other. Ullmann was a composer whose compositional style reflected the expressionism of Central Europe in the early 20th century, particularly Alban Berg and Alexander Zemlinsky. His works for stage, above all, the 1943 Der Kaiser von Atlantis, The Emperor of Atlantis, are among the greatest compositions of the 20th century. In the 21st century, these great works, suppressed by the Nazis and lost temporarily in the Shoah, are beginning to receive the performances they deserve. My colleagues and I in the New Budapest Orpheum Society, the Humanities Division Ensemble in Residence, have been actively breathing life into many of these musical works, not only in performances at the university, but also through our recordings with CD Records. Christine?
Hello again. So I'm going to talk to you about some of the common sounds from the piece, common chords. And the first is that he does use our traditional tertian chords, like a triad that's like playing every other note on the piano, A, C, E, or A, C sharp, E. So that's, and here, for example, which is in the part one, the second one that I play, it's actually number 3, but so that's very traditional. And then later on in at the very last one and the penultimate one, we have all major triads, so that's very normal. So we do have tertian. It's always in a more, sometimes more nostalgic moments of the piece. Then here is another theme with the right motif, that the one I played last time, and this is, you can hear. So that's, okay, and so he does use usual chords, but let's say you take E flat major, very common, A minor, fine, they're normal, but the relationship is that tritone again, that dissonance. So when you hear it, or there's A flat to D minor, Ooh, it has much more bite to it because of the tritone. You'll notice the very last piece when he's home, his mother, and it's quite consonant. So if here, for example, this is the ending. And after all that's preceded this, it's like you're finally at peace. I think it's quite remarkable. The ends of the other movements are quite abrupt. You won't even know it is an ending. There is no traditional cadence or amen, plagal cadence. There is nothing like that, not one in the entire piece. And the ends of each movement are kind of like, what is he doing there? So if you feel that you're having that experience, that's totally normal. The other kind of chord that's used and was common with other composers like Berg, for example, is the so-called quartal chord. So then the notes are, instead of 3 notes, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4 notes. So that would be like A, D, G, A, D, G, and C. That's a quartal chord, and they're often played as a chord, like this is one. Kind of a beautiful sound. And he often plays the quartal chords just one note at a time. Like in the part 2, the first one, you'll hear me go. I actually play it so you could slowly, and one note at a time. Here's another one. So that's kind of fun. And then another motif that we hear in the second part and the third one, and again at the end, is this. We have these quartal chords. It's like, here comes the bride, that's that perfect fourth. And the left hand has also all perfect fourths. Remember that. You'll hear it often. That's another motif that's repeated exactly. Sometimes the quartal chords are more aggressively, like. Ooh, that's more aggressively, so they're not all. And also another motif is the trumpet motif, also perfect fourths, and sometimes played individual notes like that, or again, so the quartal harmony is, those are kind of standard harmonies, but the quartal is a little bit more associated with the 20th century for sure. Okay, Phil.
Ullmann's Chronicle is a work of both self-reflection and collective biography. From the cosmopolitanism and modernism of his pre-World War II compositions, Ullmann took a turn inward toward Jewish themes and a more lyrical, melodic style. You've heard that from Christine already. He wrote songs in Yiddish and Hebrew, languages he had not known prior to the concentration camp. There is surely no more fitting work for the inward turn than Rainer Maria Rilke's Die Weise von Liebe und Tod des Kornets Christoph Rilke. Here's my copy of the first edition of that from 1912. He composed the poem before that at the very end of the 19th century, but it was published in 1912 in this remarkable edition. Perhaps no other work would have been more meaningful for the residents of the camp. One of the Czech poet's first major works, the Chronicle, it appeared as volume 1 in the most important modern literary series in the German language, the Inselbücherei, which was established in 1912 and which remains active today in 2020, publishing beautiful books still in this format. Terezin prisoners would have identified with few works more closely. Most families would have possessed their own copies, and Terezin survivors tell of reading the prose poem in the camp. Christine?
Okay, so in conclusion, I'll talk about some of the arguably more dissonant chords in the piece, and but when he does introduce a dissonant chord, he often transposes it chromatically. So, for example, this chord, that's a diminished triad, again with that tonus diabolus, the tritone, and the major seventh, all, but not that chord, but then those are all the same intervals, pitch set. So, so here it is at the end of the first part. And then at the and that's at the first progression that I talked about. Later on, we'll get it the same progression, but I'll play it slowly. So you can hear that it's the exact same chords, in fact, not even transposed. And finally, at the end of the seventh one, we have this, it's sort of like in the Wozzeck Berg, where we have a chord with 8 notes, so that's 8 out of 12. So it's basically a B, this B, plus a B flat chord. And he repeats it. It's kind of a beautiful sound. You never would think 8 notes could make something this beautiful. And he repeats it, and repeats it, and repeats it, and repeats it. It's kind of like a big cloud mushrooming. I think it's very effective. That's all. It's really a great piece, not eclectic, very interesting. And it's been a pleasure, and will be a pleasure to introduce it to you.
Let me just close, too, with a few words about the text and its meaning for history more generally, the 20th century, for our history as well. Every prisoner in Terezin would have known the story of Christoph Rilke, coming of age during the European battles of the Ottoman Empire in the 17th century, the historical backdrop of the Ullmann Rilke Chronicle. For Czechs, Germans, and Austrians, this was the red badge of courage, or All Quiet on the Western Front, the narrative recognition of the seduction of war's celebration and the futility of struggle against its eventual destruction. The Chronicle is a love death, a Liebestod, which the listener witnesses in the final scenes when the dying Christoph Rilke embraces the flag of war, which he had imagined to be his lover. As the final work composed in the camps during the Shoah, this Liebestod symbolizes the end of an era of European Jewish history. Thank you very much for joining us today for this remarkable piece of music. Viktor Ullmann und Rainer Maria Rilke, Die Weise von Liebe und Tod des Kornetts Christoph Rilke, Part 1, Scene 1. Den 24. November 1663 wurde Otto von Rilke auf Langenau, Grenitz und Zigra zu Linder mit seines in Ungarn gefallenen Bruders Christoph hinterlassenen Anteile am Gute Linde beliehen. Doch musste er einen Revers ausstellen, nach welchem die Lehensreichung null und nichtig sein sollte, im Falle sein Bruder Christoph, der nach beigebrachtem Totenschein als Kornett in der Kompanie des Freiherrn von Pirovano, des kaiserlichen, österreichischen, heistischen Regiments zu Ross, verstorben war, zurückkehrt. Part 1, Scene 2. Reiten, reiten, reiten. Durch den Tag, durch die Nacht, durch den Tag. Reiten, reiten, reiten. Und der Mut ist so müde geworden und die Sehnsucht ist so groß. Es gibt keine Berge mehr, kaum einen Baum. Nichts wagt aufzustehen. Fremde Hütten hocken, durstig an versumpften Brunnen. Nirgends ein Turm und immer das gleiche Bild. Man hat 2 Augen zu viel. Nur in der Nacht manchmal glaubt man, den Weg zu kennen. Vielleicht kehren wir nächtens immer wieder das Stück zurück, das wir in den fremden Sonne mühsam gewonnen haben. Es kann sein. Die Sonne ist schwer, wie bei uns tief im Sommer. Aber wir haben im Sommer Abschied genommen. Die Kleider der Frauen leuchteten lang aus dem Grün und nun reiten wir lang. Es muss also Herbst sein. Wenigstens dort, wo traurige Frauen von uns wissen. Scene 3. Jemand erzählt von seiner Mutter. Ein Deutscher offenbar, laut und langsam setzt er seine Worte. Wie ein Mädchen, das Blumen bindet, nachdenklich Blume und Blume probt und noch nicht weiß, was aus dem Ganzen wird. So fügte seine Worte zu Lust, zu Leide. Alle lauschen. Sogar das Spucken hört auf. Denn es sind laute Herren, die wissen, was sich gehört. Und wer das Deutsche nicht kann in dem Haufen, der versteht es auf einmal, füllt einzelne Worte. Abends. Klein war. Da sind sie alle einander nah, diese Herren, die aus Frankreich kommen und aus Burgund, aus den Niederlanden, aus Kärntens Tälern, von den böhmischen Burgen und vom Kaiser Leopold. Denn was der eine erzählt, das haben auch Sie erfahren und gerade so. Als ob es nur eine Mutter gäbe. Scene 5. Der von Langenau schreibt einen Brief ganz in Gedanken. Langsam malt er mit großen, ernsten, aufrechten Lettern. Meine gute Mutter, seid stolz. Ich trage die Fahne. Seid ohne Sorge, ich trage die Fahne. Habt mich lieb, ich trage die Fahne. Dann steckt er den Brief zu sich in den Waffenrock an die heimlichste Stelle. Und denkt, vielleicht findet ihn einmal einer. Und denkt, denn der Feind ist nah. Sie reiten über einen erschlagenen Bauern. Er hat die Augen weit offen und etwas spiegelt sich drin. Kein Himmel. Später heulen Hunde. Es kommt also ein Dorf. Endlich. Und über den Hütten steigt steinern ein Schloss. Breit hält sich ihnen die Brücke hin. Groß wird das Tor. Hochwild kommt das Horn. Horsch. Poltern, Klirren und Hundegebell. Wiehern im Hof, Hufschlag und Ruf. Die Weise von Liebe und Tod des Kornetts Christoph Rilke. Part 2, Scene 1. Rast. Gast sein einmal. nicht immer selbst seine Wünsche bewirten mit kärglicher Kost. Nicht immer feindlich nach allem fassen, einmal sich alles geschehen lassen und wissen, was geschieht, ist gut. Nicht immer Soldat sein, einmal die Locken offen tragen und den weiten offenen Kragen und in den seidenen Sesseln sitzen und bis in die Fingerspitzen so nach dem Bad sein und wieder erst lernen, was Frauen sind. Und wie die Weißen tun und wie die Blauen sind. Was für Hände sie haben, wie sie ihr Lachen singen. Wenn blonde Knaben die schönen Schalen bringen, von saftigen Früchten schwer. Scene 2. Als Mahl begann's und ist ein Fest geworden, kaum weiß man wie. Die hohen Flammen flackten, die Stimmen schwirrten, wirre Lieder klirrten aus Glas und Glanz. Und endlich aus den reif gewordenen Takten entsprang der Tanz und alle riss er hin. Das war ein Wellenschlagen in den Seelen, ein sich begegnen und ein sich erwählen, ein Abschied nehmen und ein Wiederfinden, ein Glanz genießen und ein Licht erblinden und ein sich wiegen in den Sommerwinden, die in den Kleidern warmer Frauen sind. Aus dunklem Wein und 1000 Rosen rennt die Stunde rauschend in den Traum der Nacht. Scene 3. Einer, der weiße Seide trägt, erkennt, dass er nicht erwachen kann, denn er ist wach und verwirrt von Wirklichkeit. So flieht der Bange in den Traum. und steht im Park, einsam im schwarzen Park. Und das Fest ist fern und das Licht lügt und die Nacht ist nah um ihn und kühl. Und er fragt eine Frau, die sich zu ihm neigt: Bist du die Nacht? Sie lächelt. Und da schämt er sich für sein weißes Kleid. Und möchte weit und allein und in Waffen sein. Ganz in Waffen. Part 2, Scene 5. Ist das der Morgen? Welche Sonne geht auf? Wie groß ist die Sonne? Sind das Vögel? Ihre Stimmen sind überall. Alles ist hell, aber es ist kein Tag. Alles ist laut, aber es sind nicht Vogelstimmen. Das sind die Balken, die leuchten. Das sind die Fenster, die schreien. Und sie schreien rot in die Feinde hinein. Die draußen stehen im flackernden Land, schreien Brand. Und mit zerrissenem Schlaf im Gesicht drängen sich alle, halb Eisen, halb nackt, von Zimmer zu Zimmer, von Trakt zu Trakt und suchen die Treppe. Und mit verschlagenem Atem stammen Hörner im Hof. Sammeln, sammeln und bebende Trommeln. Part 2, Scene 6. Aber die Fahne ist nicht dabei. Rufe, Kornett! Rasende Pferde, Gebete, Geschrei. Flöße, Kornett! Eisen an Eisen, Befehl und Signal. Stille. Kornett! Und noch einmal Kornett! Und heraus mit der brausenden Reiterei. Aber die Fahne ist nicht dabei. Scene 7. Er läuft um die Wette mit brennenden Gängen, durch Türen, die ihn glühend umdrängen, über Treppen, die ihn versengen, bricht er aus dem rasenden Baum. Auf seinen Namen trägt er die Fahne wie eine weiße, bewusstlose Frau. Und er findet ein Pferd und es ist wie ein Schrei über alles dahin und an allem vorbei, auch an den Seinen. Und da kommt auch die Fahne wieder zu sich. Und niemals war sie so königlich. Und jetzt sehen sie alle fern voran und erkennen den hellen, helmlosen Mann und erkennen die Fahne. Aber da fängt sie zu scheinen an, wirft sich hinaus und wird groß und rot. Da brennt ihre Fahne mitten im Feind und sie jagen ihr nach. Die Weise von Leben und Tod des Kornetts Christoph Rilke. The Finale, Scene 8. Im nächsten Frühjahr, es kam traurig und kalt, ritt ein Kurier des Freiherrn von Peroveno langsam in Langenau ein. Dort hat er eine alte Frau weinen sehen.